Welcome back. This is Dr. Vishal Trivedi from Department of Biosciences and Bioengineering, IIT Guwahati, and so far what we have discussed is the complete overview of the digestion, and then in addition to that we have also discussed about the anatomy and the structural feature of different parts of the alimentary canal. And in addition, we have also discussed in our previous lecture how the protein, carbohydrate, lipids, sugar as well as the nucleic acids are being digested. So, what we have discussed is that the protein is being digested and then ultimately you are having the amino acids. From the fat you are getting the monoglycerides and fatty acid and glycerol as the digestion product. In the case of carbohydrate, you are getting the glucose. Along with these, during the digestion we are also getting the large quantity of water. Along the food we are getting the ions, we are getting the vitamins, we are getting the other kind of minerals, etc. Okay. And so, now today what we are going to discuss is how these molecules are being absorbed into the alimentary canal when they are passing through the alimentary canal. So, coming back to the same same discussion. So, there are four major parts in the alimentary canal, starting from the buccal cavity, stomach, number 3 small intestine, and number 4 is the large intestine. In the buccal cavity, there is a no or almost very low absorption of drugs and the other sugar through the mucous lining. So, there is a absorption of sugar through mucous lining, but that is very minor. In the stomach, it does not have any machinery to absorb, but similar to the buccal cavity, it also can absorb very minor quantities of sugar, alcohol as well as the drugs. So, it can absorb the carbohydrate, minor quantities, it can absorb the medicines what we take, and then it can also absorb alcohol from alcohol. Then the food comes to the small intestine, and the small intestine is the primary site for absorption of most of the nutrients which are present in the food particles. So, as we discussed in the past also, that small intestine is a very thin diameter, but it is very lengthy in it is very long. So, because of that, it actually has a very large surface area. In addition to that, the inner lumen of the alimentary small intestine is also folded into the structures So, as you can see on our PowerPoint slide that this is the lumen of the small intestine, which is folded into the plica circularis, and this plica circularis is actually giving them the large surface area. So, the small intestine is actually having a very large surface area due to the three structures. One is plica circularis, which is this folded structure. Then on these plica circularis they have the villi, and these villi actually are increasing the surface area further because there are small projections on the plica circularis, and on the other hand the every villi is getting bifurcated into the microvilli. So, as a result the inner surface area of the small intestine is going by several thousand folds, and as a result, because you know that we have discussed in the past also that when the food is being digested, it is actually reached to a monomeric state, and as a result it actually has a very large surface area, and if you have a very large surface area you can be able to actually absorb these food particles. So, now if you see in a typical villi or villus what we have. So, in a typical villus what it has is it has a thin epithelial lining on the top, and below this epithelial lining they have a network of capillaries which is actually required to take up the food from the food which is absorbed from the villi, and then it also has a supply of blood capillaries or arteries, and as well as all the as well as the lymph nodes. The villi is always been supported by the connective tissue from the bottom, and it also contains the machinery to absorb the water, the ions, the amino acids, the fatty acids, and the monosaccharides. So, there are four different mechanisms by which these villi or the microvilli actually absorb the food, absorb the nutrients from the digested food. So, what are these mechanisms? There are four mechanisms. One is osmosis, second is the diffusion or passive transport, number 3 active transport, and number 4 is co-transport. Okay. So, now see, this is your lumen, this is your membrane, the cell membrane, and this is the blood vessel. So, this is the actually the epithelial lining, right. So, this is the lumen of the alimentary canal, okay, and so the molecules have to pass through this, okay. So, you have 4 or 5 different types of nutrients which has to be absorbed. So, what are these nutrients? You have water, okay, and water is absorbed through a mechanism known as osmosis. So, what is osmosis? Osmosis is actually the movement of solvent molecule from the higher concentration of solute to the lower concentration of solute. So, as you can see, for the water you have high quantity of water on this side and you have the lower quantity of water on this side. So, it actually passes through this cell membrane or epithelial lining and then enter into the blood vessel. Similarly, you have the ions. So, you can think about like sodium for example. Okay. So, sodium is entering through a mechanism which is called as the active transport. Or the co-transport. So, sodium is present here, okay, and sodium, as you know, sodium is a positively charged ion. So, it actually generates it has a positively charged clouds around it. So, it actually binds the chloride which is present in the digested product, and then it enters into the, it crosses the epithelial lining and enters into the body, and then so that could be, so this is called as the co-transport. In other case, sodium is also entering into the crossing the epithelial lining through a active transport, and active transport is done by expelling another item outside. So, active transport requires the energy for putting the sodium across the epithelial lining. And then so, apart from sodium, you have potassium, you have other kind of cations, and as well as so they also follow the similar kind of absorption mechanisms, and they enter into the body, except the calcium, because calcium requires the vitamin D for getting the transported across the from the alimentary canal to the blood vessels. Number 3 is the carbohydrate. So, the carbohydrates, as you know, carbohydrates are glucose. The final digested product is glucose. So, this glucose actually follows the similar kind of transportation mechanism, like they are actually going through the active transport, where the glucose is getting in through from the outside, like similar to this. This does not bind the chloride, but it gets exchanged with the other ion, and there is a co-transport of glucose along with the other molecules, and glucose is also being taken by the active transport, which is by the receptor which is present on the epithelial lining. Then we have the proteins, okay, and the proteins final digested product is the amino acid. Majority of the amino acids actually crosses the epithelial lining and enters into the body following the similar mechanism as the carbohydrate. Now, it comes to the another molecule, and that is number 5, and that is fat. So, fat is following a different kind of mechanisms. Fat is actually, you know, that bile salt are actually forming a bile, not the salt actually. So, bile is forming the micelles, and these micelles are actually the small particles, okay, and these micelles are actually binding the final digested product from the fat, and what is the final digested product from the fat is the fatty acid and the monoglycerides. So, they are binding these two molecules, okay, on their surface, okay, and These micelles are actually hydrophobic in nature. So, they crosses the epithelial lining into the blood vessel, okay, and then it releases these fatty acid and monoglycerides here, and here all the fat is being unloaded, and this goes back and again recycles. So, this recycling of the micelles from outside to inside continues for several rounds, and as a result the digested product of fatty acid and monoglycerides are entering into the body. Now, let us see the PowerPoint, and I will summarize you what we have discussed so far. In the PowerPoint, what we have said is that you have three compartments. One is the lumen of the small intestine, then you have the epithelial lining, and then you have the blood capillaries. Okay. So, what you have is the protein, the digested product is amino acids. So, amino acids are either entering through a facilitated transport like active transport, or they are following the co-transport. So, for every amino acid there is a receptor or the non-receptor mediated uptake of amino acids. Then similarly, the carbohydrate are getting digested as a monosaccharides. So, monosaccharides could be glucose, galactose, fructose or mannose, and these monosaccharides are also following the similar kind of active transport mechanisms, where they will have their either they will have a receptor which is helping them to transport the mechanism. Similarly, now for the bile, the bile salts are forming the micelles, and these micelles are getting coated with the lipid droplets or the fatty acids, and then these fatty acids are actually crossing the membrane as because these are the hydrophobic in nature. So, hydrophobic molecules are easily being getting carried over and enter into the body, and then they release the fatty acid into the cytosol, and which eventually enters into the blood capillaries, and then they return back to the outside, and then again carry over the another round of fatty acids which has been digested. Okay. And this cycle continued on several rounds, and then they will absorb. Similarly, for other molecules like water, it enters into the blood or into the body through a process known as osmosis, and as well as for example, the sodium or glucose, it both follows the active transport as well as the co-transport mechanisms. So, now let us discuss how the digestion how the absorption take place in the large intestine. So, in the large intestine, so large intestine, if you remember, we have discussed the anatomy of large intestine. So, large intestine has three components, and the major component which is responsible for absorbing the water from the undigested food is the colon part, and colon has three component, and these colon part is very high diameter, is in very high diameter, and that high diameter is required because it allows the undigested food particles to move very slowly. So, because of that, it gives the time for the villi or the brush borders present on the large intestine to absorb the water from the undigested food. So, actually the large intestine absorbs the water from the undigested food. Along with the undigested food, along with the water, it also absorbs some remaining ions, and also because the large intestine actually has no mechanism, has also the growth of bacteria. Those bacteria actually produces some vitamins and other kind of nutrients, and those also are being absorbed from the large intestine, the colon part. So, the absorption mechanism is same as we discussed for the small intestine, that it follows only the osmosis as a mechanism to absorb the water from the undigested food, and this absorption is required because water is a is required for maintaining the tonicity, as well as it is required for driving the metabolic reactions in the body. So, with this we have discussed the complete process of the digestion. We have discussed about the overview of a digestion. We have discussed about the anatomy and the structural features of the different organs of the anatomy, and we also have discussed the process as well as the absorption of these nutrients from the food. But since we and I think we have discussed in the past also that since this is a machinery which actually doing the processing the food particles, machinery can also go bad, and that machinery, if the machinery goes bad, it actually gives the problems in terms of developing the diseases. So, now what we are going to discuss is about the different types of diseases. So, as we discussed in the past, that diseases could be where the functioning of alimentary canal is not working, or there is a nutritional defects. These nutritional defects could be of two types: more nutrition or less nutrition. Means either the excess of something or the absence of something. Okay. So, the diseases could arise because the alimentary canal is not properly functioning, or different components of alimentary canal is not functioning, or the diseases could come because there is a nutritional defects. These nutritional defects could be that there is a excess of something and that is actually not balanced, and so and or there is a complete absence of some particular crucial nutritional nutrients in the food. So, let us discuss about the function. Okay. So, we will start from the buccal cavity. So, within the buccal cavity, if you remember, we have said we have three molecules. One is teeth, one is tongue, and the third is salivary glands, right? Okay. So, let us talk about the problem of teeth. Okay. So, one of the since the teeth is actually working and it is main job is the mechanical doing the mechanical processes. So, their main job is to chop the food into smaller particles, and since they are meant for that purpose, and they are actually the first organ which are receiving the food, and whatever the food we are taking is actually remains there. It is not like the 100% food particles which we churn into the mouth goes into the alimentary canal. So, the remaining food particles actually invite the bacteria to grow. Although the saliva contains the lysozyme and other antimicrobial molecules, but they do not be able to enough to support or to stop the growth of the bacteria. So, as a result there is a growth of bacteria within the buccal cavity. Along with the bacteria, sometimes there is a infection with the viruses as well. So, once the bacteria grows and it infects the teeth, because teeth is, if you remember, teeth is made up of the enamel as well as the dentine, and these two are actually protein. So, the teeth have actually, the attacks on the these particles. So, what happen is that actually causes the problem to teeth, and that one of the such disease is known as pyria. Okay. And in the pyria, what happen is that the bacteria actually infects the nearby connective tissue within the connective tissue which holds the teeth into the jaw bones. So, what happen is the bacteria actually infects the gum, and because of that gums becomes slightly swell, and when the gums get swell, they loses or they could not be able to hold the teeth for very strongly, and as a result the teeth starts moving. So, that actually causes the or bleeding from the gums. Okay. And this is done by a bacteria. Okay. B, if you remember when we have discussed about the salivary glands, so there are viruses which actually infects the salivary glands, and then that actually causes the swelling of salivary glands and causes a disease known as mumps. Okay. Number C. Okay. Since the buccal cavity is the only site where you are processing the food first time, and the food can be, so the food could be very simple, where you don't have the much the hot spices, or the food could contain the hot spices, and because the food is very of variety type. Okay, we take the food which is hot also. So, because of that, a food contains large quantity of spices. So, if you are taking a food which contains a huge quantity of spices, so spices actually have a tendency that when they reacts with the water which is present in the buccal cavity, it generates very large quantity of free radicals. So, spices contains the alkaloids, and these alkaloids, when they reacts with water, they produces the free radicals, and the buccal cavity is, although buccal cavity is coated with the mucous lining, these free radicals normally get a chance to attack on the epithelial lining. So, as a result, what happened? It actually damages the epithelial lining, and that damages happen on a discrete spots within the buccal cavity or within our mouth. And when this happens, it actually invites the immune cells to come and repair these damages, and as a result, we get the swelling of these areas. Okay. And that actually is responsible for development of the mouth ulcer. So, when you take the spicy food, it actually enters and then it causes the generation of free radicals, and that free radical actually damages our epithelial lining, because the amount of free radical what it is being generated is much more than the mucus which is being present in the buccal cavity, and as a result it actually causes the swelling, and then ultimately it develops into the mouth ulcer, and that mouth ulcer is get cured, because eventually it is under the repairing mechanism. So, it get cured once you stop taking the spicy foods. Now, so that is the ulcer. Okay. Now, moving to the stomach. Okay. So, the buccal cavity is connected through to the stomach through a connection known as oesophagus, and oesophagus. So, and oesophagus is connected through the stomach known as the cardiac valve, and that is sometime get dilated or does not work function properly. So, if you remember, we have discussed that the content from the oesophagus to stomach is linearly being controlled, means the content can go from the oesophagus to stomach, but they cannot come back because there is a wall present between the stomach and the oesophagus. And once this wall does not work properly, it actually allows the content of stomach to come into the oesophagus, and that is responsible for one of the disease known as acid reflux or heartburning. Why it is called as heartburning? Because it happens very close to your chest, and that is actually the position of heart, and that is why people think that it is some kind of pain happening within the heart, but it is not the pain in heart. It actually a pain because the acid which is being secreted within the stomach comes into the oesophagus, and that actually since oesophagus lining is not being well protected to withstand the acid, it actually that acid damages the oesophagus lining, and that actually gives the burning sensation, and because of that there is a pain in the chest. Then stomach, the similar mechanism happens what we have discussed for the mouth ulcer. Stomach also develops the ulcer following the similar mechanisms, or there is a mechanism that bacteria is also responsible, and that bacteria is known as Helicobacter pylori. So, that ulcer is developed into the stomach as well, that where the free radicals generated from the spices or the other molecule damages the epithelial lining which is covered by the mucus, and that damages actually allows the bacteria to grow, and as a result you have the abscess being formed within the stomach, and that abscess actually causes the bleeding and as well as the discomfort. Right? There is another problem which happens in the kids, and that is they do the vomiting. Okay. So, the vomiting is developed because the food is being moved from one part of the alimentary canal to the other part of the alimentary canal by a systematic mechanisms, and these mechanisms are known as the peristaltic movement or the segmentation movement. Okay. So, if you so before discussing about the vomiting, let us discuss how these movements actually take place. So, as you can see on the PowerPoint slide, what you will see that we have depicted the two mode of movement which are happening within the alimentary canal to passage the food from one part of the alimentary canal to the other part of the alimentary canal. In one part, in one mechanism which is called the peristaltic movement, what you do is, see, there is a rhythmic contraction and distension of the alimentary canal. Because of that, food actually moves from one part to another part. So, it is like a contraction and distension throughout the alimentary canal. So, you can imagine that wherever it is going to be contract, the food will move forward, and then this continued for many times. Similarly, you have the segmentation movement, where the segmentation movement is the place where you are going to have the contraction. The food is, or the material is going to be spilled towards the both side, and since that continues, it also allows the so that is also going to be rhythmic, and as a result the food particle will move towards the both direction, and it will move in along the alimentary canal. So, once you now if you want to understand the vomiting, so what happens? Food is moving from the oesophagus and it is moving towards the stomach in a normal individual using the peristaltic movement. Means you are pressing in the center and it is moving towards this side. Okay? But under the circumstances when you are actually experiencing the vomiting sensation, and that vomiting sensation comes because of certain conditions, like whether you are feeling the nausea, or whether you are feeling headache, or whether you are feeling, so it actually being largely being controlled by the nervous system, and as a result what happen is this peristaltic movement, which actually runs in this direction from top to bottom, means from towards the oesophagus to stomach side, it goes into the reverse orientation, and that is called the reverse peristaltic movement. And as a result of reverse peristaltic movement, the content of stomach goes through the stomach, through the oesophagus, and eventually comes out from the mouth. So, it is just like a reverse or reversal of the complete ingestion process. So, the wall between the stomach and oesophagus get opened, then the food enters into the buccal cavity, and eventually the person throw the food from the mouth, and this whole process is known as the vomiting. Apart from the vomiting, we also so now come back to the small intestine. Okay. So, in the small intestine, there is no specific disease which is being developed because the small intestine is not working properly, but the small intestine as well as the large intestine is mainly being responsible for absorbing the nutrients and absorbing the nutrients from the digested food as well as the water. So, they actually when removed the water from the food and conserve the water within the body. So, when they do not conserve the water and let the water to go along with the undigested food, which is actually the feces, that is a condition when which is called as diarrhea. Okay. So, what happened in the case of diarrhea is that the stomach, the small intestine as well as mostly the large intestine does not being able to absorb the water, and that happens because there is a infection in these two alimentary canal. That infection could be of bacterial origin or could be of the virus origin. Bacteria, the one of the popular bacteria in this case is Salmonella, and in the case of viruses it could be the rotavirus. Okay. So, what happen is when these Salmonella or rotavirus infects the inner lining of the small intestine or mostly the large intestine, this inner lining does not work properly, and as a result they would not be able to absorb the water which is present in the food, and then that comes along with that get wasted along with the feces. So, what you are going to have is the watery stools, and that, so what is going to do, it is going to cause the dehydration, and that eventually can lead to the death of the particular individual, and that can be restored by taking a ORS or the oral rehydration solution. And along with that, if you take the antibiotics or antiviral drugs, you can be able to control the diarrhea which is being developed in the alimentary canal. Now, along with this, okay, you develop many kind of other types of diseases, where the organs are working properly, but they are not being able to work in accordance or in coordination with each other. And one of such disease is known as jaundice. Okay. So, jaundice is developed because the bile which is being secreted by the liver and be stored in the gallbladder appears into the blood or appears into the urine. So, how this happens? How the bile is appearing into the blood and urine? Because the bile is being produced by the liver and it is being stored into the gallbladder, okay, and that is supplying, so gallbladder is supplying that to the small intestine, the duodenum part, through a duct known as common bile duct. Now, what happen is, so liver is liver is producing the bile, it is getting stored into the gallbladder and it is being released whenever the small intestine is require the bile from the liver. So, this bile which is should be given to the small intestine when there is a digestion of fat is required, but in these cases where the jaundice develop, the bile instead of going into the small intestine, there is a there could be a blockage, and that blockage actually let the bile enters into the blood, and once it enters into the blood, it also goes into the urine and as well as into the stools. How the jaundice is going to be problematic? Because the bile salts are actually not good for the human being, and they actually causes the many problems. One of such problem is that they disturb the metabolisms within the human body, and that eventually leads to the complications and death. This can be corrected by only the two procedure. One is that you go for the if it is the obstructive jaundice, that means there is a obstruction in the whole pathway, then you remove the obstruction by the surgery. Or if it is a hematological jaundice, means so jaundice, this is can be developed by the hematological method as well, because if the blood is going to be lysed within the blood capillaries, that also can develop the large quantities of bilirubin and biliverdin, and that also can mimic the similar condition what is developed in the jaundice. So, if that happens, then it has to be controlled accordingly. Apart from that, the another disease which develops within the large intestine or is called as constipation. So, we have just discussed about the diarrhea, and diarrhea developed because there is a less absorption of food, less absorption of water from the stools, okay, and as a result the stool becomes watery. But in this case there is a more absorption of water, or there is a less water being present in our food, and as a result what happen is the stools becomes very hard and it does not move smoothly within the alimentary canal, and then it creates other kind of problems. Apart from that, there are multiple nutritional diseases are also very common, and one of those couple of those diseases are related to the deficiency of protein or the carbohydrate, and there are these two diseases are comes under the category known as protein energy disorder. You have two classical example. So, in the protein deficiency disorder means there is a deficiency of protein and there is a deficiency of carbohydrate. Okay. And these two disease conditions develop because the person is not taking the adequate amount of protein as well as the adequate amount of carbohydrate, and these there are two diseases which we are going to discuss. One of the disease is known as the Marasmus and the second is known as Kwashiorkor. Okay. So, first one is Marasmus, the second one is Kwashiorkor, and in the case of and both of these disease develop because there is a protein energy disorder or there is a deficiency of protein and carbohydrate. Both are developed in the developing childs. But there is a difference. The Marasmus is actually a deficiency of both the protein plus carbohydrate, and why the Marasmus is developed. So, Marasmus the condition when the Marasmus is developed in any infant or the developing child, it does not develop properly and it remains stunted growth and it causes its brain development problems, and that happens because these kids are not getting the adequate amount of milk from their mother, or that happens because they are getting the milk from the mother, but that mother is not taking the adequate nutrition. So, there is no sufficient quantities of protein and carbohydrate being present in the milk which they are taking. So, these problems actually causes the developmental issues as well as these kids are very lethargic and they do not work, they are not very active, and this can be cured by providing the milk which is good in protein and carbohydrate. Apart from that, we have many nutritional related diseases such as deficiency of such as rickets, osteomalacia, or even like other kind of diseases, and these diseases or the deficiency of vitamins like beriberi or other kind of problems. So, with this we are done with our digestion and absorption chapter, and good luck to you all.